Hello and welcome to the Onyx Path Twitch channel. I am Travis Legge, the programming coordinator for the Onyx Path Twitch channel. And today I have the honor, privilege, pleasure, and rare life experience of sharing an hour with Mr. Matthew Dawkins, the gentleman gamer. There are so many other names he's known by.
Yeah, some of which can't be repeated for legal reasons.
Many of which will get us just TOS'd right off of Twitch.
Yeah. Yeah, how rare is it, Travis, that we get to spend a nice hour together on camera?
It feels like I haven't seen you in years, ages.
Yeah.
A lifetime. A fruit fly's lifetime since I have laid eyes on you.
And we do have much in common with fruit flies.
Indeed. But today we're here for a specific, special reason. Not just to, relish in our time together, but also to share that time with you and share the knowledge, the timeless knowledge of Mummy the Curse with the brilliant mind of Matthew Dawkins, who has developed this game and brought it forth from the sands of time into the hands of Kickstarter. So we have a lot of questions that we were able to gather from the Onyx Path forums, and we have a lot of people in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. And I just want to remind everyone as well that if you have a question you want to ask in chat, you can absolutely just go ahead and type question in all caps up front so that I'm sure I see it. We'll scroll through it and double check and make sure that we don't miss it. But before we get too far into all of that stuff, in case there's somebody who has hopped on here and just isn't aware, in brief, what is Mummy the Curse 2nd Edition, Matthew?
What is Mummy the Curse 2nd Edition in brief? I am rubbish at elevator pitches. So this game is all about playing immortals, deathless creatures that were made so thousands upon thousands of years ago. And you wake up from your sleep immensely powerful, but lacking in memory. You don't know who you are, when you are, where you are. But you often have a cult there to serve you and to reassure you as to who you are. Sometimes you will find other mummies like you who may be able to fill in the blanks. As your memory increases, quite often your Sakem, your power decreases. So while you start off with godlike power and prowess, by the end of your awakening, as you near your descent, you may be less physically and cosmically able, but able to recall everything. You'll have immense godlike knowledge. So then it becomes a race against time to ensure that you've got the, preventatives in place so that the next time you wake up, you are able to know more immediately and be able to benefit from both knowledge and power. That's one aspect. There's a hell of a lot of mythology around Mummy the Curse that you can choose to use. There's the ability to play other immortals as well as mortal sorcerers and mortal cultists. There's the fantastic timeless aspect of Mummy the Curse 2nd Edition, where mummies don't wake up in a chronologically linear order. So your first game could be set in the Renaissance, the next one could be set in the Middle Ages, then you could jump forward to the Second World War, then jump back to the Dark Ages, however you choose. And it makes sense within the context of the game because mummies are essentially consciousnesses, souls that exist at all points in time. And so where you are placed, where you are plucked from, is really dependent on your judge, your god's will. So there's my elevator pitch. I think that's the quickest I have ever done a synopsis of Mummy. I'll do one more. One more. It's a game in many ways about eternal slavery. You are destined to constantly wake up and serve and question, and just as you're unlocking the mysteries, you are doomed into Duat, the land of the dead. And when you wake up, you are fated to ask those questions again. So in many ways, as well as it being a horror game, a cosmic horror game, and it being a game about undeath and a game about being trapped in the cycle, it's a mystery game, because every single time you awake, you will have a purpose, a mystery to solve, essentially, and hopefully you will do so to prevent yourself having to look into that exact same mystery the next time you wake up.
Well, and it's got a bit of I always get this one wrong. Sisyphean tragedy to it, right? Like you're kind
Sisyphean, but yes.
Yeah. you're rolling that rock up the hill, and right when you think you've got it to the peak, you knock back out and wake up 500 years earlier with even less of a clue.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's well, that sounds super awesome. And what I would like to do, if you have no objection, is go right ahead and dive right into what we've got in the forums in the Q&A. There are a number of questions that I have just based on the elements that I've heard you talk about in that opening pitch, also in some Q&As and some interviews that you've done. But I want to make sure that we're getting to the questions of the folks at home first. So
okay.
Let's get those just out of the way. And so, and you're, please, everyone on the entire internet, forgive me. I am a Midwestern American who learned more about pronunciation from reading than speaking, and mostly English. So if I screw up a pronunciation of a word here, Matthew, please feel free to correct me. Internet, please feel free to yell at me. I deeply, deeply apologize. I will do my best.
I will yell at you and burst your eardrums. And I just wanted to say hello to everyone watching on Twitch right now. I can see so many of you there. Clara, Megan, Nicholas, Gal Rukin, now that I know how to pronounce your surname. Hello, and thank you very much, all of you, for tuning in.
Yes, thank you so much for being here. So the first question comes from Branford on the forums. Do Sadiqs exist outside of linear time like their mummies?
So Sadiq are the eternal servants of mummies, and mummies are the only creatures in the game at this point that are going to be hopping around between different eras. So Sadiq have a linear journey. Now, that doesn't mean there isn't going to be facility to drag a Sadiq into different eras with you, but as presented in the core, Sadiq, immortals, cultists, sorcerers are stuck on a linear timeline. It's only the Arisen who are jumping around all over the place.
Gotcha. So they're also eternal, but moving forward, kind of in a what we traditionally experience this time.
Yeah, you could argue that the timeless aspect of mummies is part of the curse that the judges, that the Shanayatu, the sorcerer priests, they're not the same thing, or are they, laid down on the Arisen. And as Sadiq are created by mummies, the curse on them isn't quite as... it's still pretty bloody dreadful to be tied to a mummy for an eternity, but it's not quite as dreadful as the lot that the mummies ended up with. Now, that's actually quite useful, and various servants such as Sadiq, Eternals, and the other immortals, for that matter, are very useful for an Arisen to have, because they can help you very easily fill in the blanks of what's been going on in the time around now. And the Sadiq, out of all your cultists, is the one that you can theoretically always trust, because their life is bound to your existence.
Gotcha. Okay, so they're above and beyond what a cult expects as reward. They are invested personally in your well-being. Cool, I like it. And from the chat, we have is it Nicholas Maloney? I hope I didn't butcher that too badly.
That's Nicholas Milioni. He's a long-time fan of a lot of what Onyx Path puts out. So hello, Nicholas. Thank you very much for tuning in.
Hello, and yeah, thanks. He says, we know that mummies' bodies can be from any culture. The vessels can come from every culture. I'm interested if the rest of the game is also that multicultural. For instance, can a mummy's cult have elements of, say, Polynesian mythology, or an emanation of Jude taking not an Eremite shape but an Aztec shape?
Yeah, definitely. We have a geography chapter, a world for exploring, I think is what it's called, where we present gnomes, as they're called in Mummy the Curse, essentially your domains from Vampire. Every Chronicles of Darkness book has a series of profiles on different cities or sites or locations. And Mummy is certainly no different in the sense that you can set it anywhere around the world. And likewise, mummies can take on any appearance. Their Sahu, their physical form, in reality shouldn't exist because they have been dead or deathless a very long time. And when they're in the land of the dead, they are unmoving, they are not awake, and their body is essentially just a corpse. But that means when they wake up and Sekhem starts to reassemble what they are or what they were, they could appear however they want to be. Now, I doubt that many Arisen go into a form with a specific intention in mind. I don't think they wake up and they think, right, I want to look like a male supermodel today. With this awakening, I want my hair to always be perfectly in place. I want the perfect cheekbones. They will resemble their own self-image. And what that means is if they were last awake during the height of the Aztec Empire, and they had assembled a cult of Aztec priests and warriors, then let's say they wake up, let's say they wake up in 550 CE in Constantinople during the plague of Justinian, but their most abiding memory, the most recent memory, was of their being in Tenochtitlan in what would become Mexico. Well, they may stand out slightly because they will look like a somewhat from the Aztec Empire. But what I particularly like about that, you don't have to necessarily do it that way. You can. It allows you to play characters of different ethnicities, different cultural backgrounds. Every mummy still has the same Iramite, nameless empire heritage at their core. That is embedded in the game, just the same as in Vampire, the Requiem, at least in the core book, you still have 5 clans, and those are your 5 options. But the big difference in Mummy the Curse 2nd edition is while you can, I guess, moliate your appearance based on your perception of yourself, you can plan it by, let's say, investing one of your organs in one of your cultists and taking over their body. So if you need to shed your body, or if your body has taken so much harm, which is quite difficult to do to a mummy, and with all respect, you can transfer into another body. So it makes for a pretty good subterfuge. So yeah, changing your appearance, changing your culture, changing your ethnicity. If you want to be in the body of an Aztec priest, by all means, when you're writing up your character backstory, you can explain how either that's how you perceive yourself, or in a previous awakening you had invested one of your pillars in an Aztec priest, and you have subsequently taken over his or her body. So yeah, lots of options for multiculturalism, and I think it's something the game very much needed.
That's super cool. And so there are, just to piggyback off of what you explained there are a number of ways. It's not just like your I'm going to skew weird here because that's what I do when I make film references. It's not just your Bubba Hotep where like your body was in this particular sarcophagus and that's the vessel you're stuck to. There are other ways you can sort of wind up hopscotching through time.
Oh yeah, there's a perfect median point in your in the level of Sekhem that you possess, where you will start looking like a perfect human. Your skin will look flush with health. You will walk with a spring in your step, but you essentially go from godlike, almost movie mummy, through to perfect ideal of human, through to desiccated corpse again as you start to run out of SecM. The difference is the desiccated corpse at the beginning is brimming and pulsating with power. I always picture SecM as almost a blue life force. I don't know why I always see it as blue. I think I may have been watching too much of The Expanse recently. But I see mummies who have just woken up as very much being lots of shades of black and grey and generally looking corpse-like, but also having this hum of power from within them. Whereas when they're at the lower end of SecM, they just look like corpses.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Cool. Let's hop back over to the forum real quick. Next question we have up are what qualities or strengths, or what are the qualities or strengths that you think that Mummy the Curse brings to the table that other games don't? So what makes it kind of unique, I guess?
Well, it occupies a strange ground, actually, in Chronicles of Darkness, because one could argue it's the most meta-plot-heavy Chronicles of Darkness game. And so it balances a fine line there between those people who like World of Darkness, those people who like Chronicles of Darkness. There's a bit for both of you from just a setting perspective. In that, although Mage the Awakening does have it to a degree, but not so much in second edition, Mummy has a defined origin point, and therefore there is a certain lore cachet attached to it. So if you like that kind of thing, that's something Mummy has that not many of the Chronicles of Darkness games have. It also has, of course, the timeless aspect, which, as I've noticed people posting in the Twitch chat, allows you to really exploit the Dark Eras books. Now, as if you needed a bigger or better reason to start looking at Dark Eras Companion and Dark Eras 2, Mummy the Curse invites you, encourages you to do that, because your starting scenario in 2019 or 2020 is probably only going to be the first time you awake. After you do that, not every storyteller is comfortable envisioning what the far future looks like. Now, if you play a Mummy game chronologically, linearly, and this is something oddly first edition didn't really account for, you wake up in the present day, you fall into duat, and if you really want to carry on playing your character, advancing in experience and advancing in knowledge of themselves, their cult has got to just constantly be waking them up, disturbing them, and they're spending just a few months in duat each time. Or you jump forward a long way. And as I say, not all storytellers are comfortable with far future play, but historical play, as Dark Ages Vampire has shown, Requiem for Rome has shown, is always popular, and the Dark Eras books cater to exactly that kind of play. So you can really start exploring the different Dark Eras, not just the ones that are Mummy focused, although those are of course ideal. So yeah, if you want to, again, mentioning Aztecs, if you want to explore the height of the Aztecs, if you want to explore Roanoke, if you want to look into the themed eras like the Reign of Terror or the Scandinavian witch trials that are in Dark Eras 2, there's something there for everyone, and there's perfect justification for why mummies would be there. They exist at all points in time. And if you are trying to struggle, if you're struggling to wrap your head around, well, how could my mummy have got to North America before even the Vikings arrived? Well, the simple get out is it's magic, but your character doesn't have to know, because you've got this built-in conceit of you have no memory, or you have very little memory. So your most recent awakening that you played does not have to be the last time your character was awake, if that makes sense.
Sure, right.
So if you were last playing in 2019 and the next time you wake up is in 200 BCE in North America, somewhere on the plains, you, the storyteller and the players, can build in so much mystery by having you look different, by having you have a different cult for obvious reasons. It's 2,200 years prior. And you basically have the question, how the hell do I end up here? Or how the hell did I start off here?
Right.
So you can trace back origins as a whole chronicle, and that can be great fun.
Cool. Awesome. And real quick, I'm gonna duck into chat to ask the next question, but before that, that does bring the question to my mind. Does that then include or invite rules for futuristic play? Are there any guidelines going to be included in Mummy for taking your chronicle into the 24th century, or Buck
We
Rogers and
haven't
the Desiccated Corpse?
we haven't Space 1999. Unfortunately, we've already passed that. The core book does have at least one story hook set in the future, Mummies on Mars, as of the next Sothic turn, which will be in another 1,400, and let me calculate based on the last one, 13 years, I think. Either way, yes, so there is a chronicle hook where your game is set on Mars in the future. And again, you've got the question, how did I get there? But we're not extremely focusing on
Right.
far future play. Not yet. But I don't know. We'll have to see what comes out with other Mummy source books. I like Mummies on Mars. I blame Tom Baker's Doctor Who.
I think it's a brilliant hook. So let's see. We have Big Damn Hero asks, other than the playable immortals discussed in the book, what other creatures get a shout out, however brief, i.e., purified vampires? What other denizens of the Chronicles of Darkness world are getting touched on in this?
Well, vampires from Requiem play a fairly important part, because I would say that of all potential core splats, as they're often called, vampires from Requiem are probably the best choice, mainly because they have the same lengthy life without having to do much to preserve it, which may be diminishing some of the struggles vampires go through. But if a mage wants to be immortal, they have to break lots of rules. And certainly other splats can be immortal too, but they don't necessarily have the same vested interest in history as vampires might. There's also, although it isn't played upon a huge amount in second edition Requiem, the same sort of fog of ages where you don't always remember so much from your history. It hasn't been eliminated from second edition because it was very present in first edition, but it does allow you to tie vampires and mummies in together. I think we make a few references here and there to some of the other Chronicles of Darkness games, werewolves as well. I know I've mentioned it a few times. It isn't strictly canon, because if you dig deeply enough into Forsaken's meta plot, not that there is one, but its cosmology would probably be a better way of putting it. I always like to have the judges be very similar to the Idagam, because they're both alien, they're both quite cosmic and Lovecraftian, and so I can see a lot of crossover there. You don't have to do it that way, but I definitely think having a werewolf pack as a cult is eminently doable. It makes perfect sense, as long as they don't think that you are ruining their territory by being on it, because you do have a habit with Severus of driving some people to unpleasant extremes, arguably as badly as Prometheans do. Prometheans, to spoil the land, you just do it to the people. So together, you could make one hell of a team.
Yeah, get yourself a mummy with a cult of Prometheans. They'd be in real good shape.
Yeah.
And from the forum, we have, is it Aiden asking, what part of the first edition Mummy were you most hoping to preserve in the transition, and what part were you most hoping to change in the transition to second edition?
Now this will amuse some people, because one of them has come under some scrutiny. So one of the things I really enjoyed from first edition, probably more than anything else, was the way the utterances played in first edition. I really liked the tiers of power. I liked the pillar requirements and the way it differed from each tier. I thought it was a really nice puzzle box. It was, again, part of the mystery of the game. And I was fairly set on carrying that over to second edition, and the writers all seemed to be happy with it as well. Seemed to be, damn it, they were. They know when to follow orders. But
happiness is mandatory.
Yeah, exactly. But and this is something I welcome. I always welcome on anything that I'm developing or working on in any capacity. There was a lot of fan feedback and customer feedback based on Kickstarter regarding the utterances. People wanted to see more. They wanted to see the mechanics tinkered with. They wanted to see adjustments. And we've been discussing it among the writing team. What can we change? Is it something we should change? Because we should never design by committee. We should never just cave because a few vocal people, even if it's 10 vocal people online, are up in arms about something. But what I found very interesting with the feedback we were getting was how well thought out it was, how considered it was, and how they were proposing things that we didn't think of. And this is something, just going, I guess, a bit off piece into the idea of design. If I come up with something and write it in an outline and all the writers go along with it, because why wouldn't they? You can kind of trap yourself in a bit of creative bubble. And then if you're playtesting with that material, as I did, and you're confident in it, it can come across as working perfectly fine. But then you start exposing it to the atmosphere, you start exposing it to the fans and the customers, and they'll come up with ideas you never thought of. And sometimes those ideas don't jive with what you want, they don't match your vision for the game, and you can't incorporate them. And so you just have to move on and hopefully not lose a customer. But sometimes that's the cost of creation, I guess, creating a game. But in this case, we all agreed there were some really good ideas being thrown about and some really good criticisms. And so that's why we added a stretch goal for additional utterances to be added, and why we're going to be playing around with the existing ones, because it's important that we get this game right. So that was something I wanted to carry over, but is now going to be changed a bit. Something I didn't want to carry over, if that was the second part of the question.
Yeah. Well, yes, that was the other part of the question.
Yeah. So the other part of the question then was the density of the game. Now, your mileage may vary on this. There are some games, some dense games I truly love, like Vampire the Masquerade, for instance. Everyone, I think, knows that I'm quite invested in the meta plot for Vampire. But while I have a lot of love for Mummy, it was my first paid assignment, I was also aware that a lot of people struggled accessing Mummy. It's whether it was the terminology in the game, whether it was the depth of meta plot presented up front, whether it was the layout of the book with players accessing one half and storytellers accessing the other. This was all first edition. I wasn't as hot on keeping the game as dense as that. I still want there to be mystery. I still want it to be a game you can explore, because I think that's important in any game, let alone one that's almost based around cosmic mystery. But I wanted the guilds to have more accessible names and more accessible roles in this edition of the game. And Megan Fitzgerald, the writer of the guilds, did a fantastic job with it. She is brilliant at writing the playable splats. And I wanted the decrees to have a really important role. These are essentially your, I guess, that it's your internal drive, your overriding passion. And they were rather off to the side in first edition, but we wanted to put them forward for second edition, because the playable options should be the things that grab people as soon as they open the book. and again, Jason Achowskis, I believe I pronounced your name correctly, Jason, but feel free to correct me. And Chris Hanforth wrote those decrees, and again, wonderful, absolutely wonderful work. I think Chris Allen had a part to play with all that as well. And yeah, by the way, writers, I do apologize if I miss any of you out. It was a big team and quite a long time ago. But my point is the thing I wanted to drop was what made the game so difficult for some people to get into. And I think we managed to drop it without making the game feel completely different. Rather than just cut and rewrite, we have expanded, opened a few doors, and just made the material eminently more readable.
Cool. That's awesome. That sounds dope. And I think there is a certain amount of I've been playing games for 35 years, and there are certain games that when you encounter, you kind of run into a bit of that wall of noise when you crack the book open. And if it's a good enough hook, you can push through it and get really invested. But yeah, I think that striving to remove as much of that noise as possible, I think that's a very exciting sort of guiding star to hear mentioned. So
yeah, I don't know whether it's age, Travis, for both of us, because when I first got into Vampire the Masquerade, I've spoken to so many people who just say they can't get into Vampire because there's so much to read. And they were put off the Forgotten Realms, for instance, for D&D because there was just so much lore, and they were worried that the DM would introduce something they were supposed to know about the Zentarium, and why would they, and that kind of thing. But when I was getting into Vampire and the Forgotten Realms and Planescape and various other settings, I was probably in my late teens, early 20s. And at that point, my brain was a sponge, and I was prepared to just, I could read anything, I would absorb it and digest it, and it formed a part of my psyche.
right.
Then Mummy the Curse comes out about 10 years later. By that point, my mind is a block of granite. I can learn no more from this point, especially from a role playing game. I'm just looking at these words and thinking, all I want to do is know how to play. And so that's maybe unfair. That's not how I felt with Mummy, but I certainly feel that with some games and some books in general, my media has to be more accessible now in my dotage.
I think age is a factor, and I think the timeline of encounter is a factor. I was I was in high school when I ran across my first Vampire the Masquerade book, and it was a soft cover. To give you an idea of how it was a soft cover core book, to give you an idea of how long ago that was, so there was less to digest, so having things in a bite size and then being able to gradually grow them is also an important thing. But in the absolute opposite spirit of small digestible pieces comes our next question from chat, which is from Almakov, I believe.
Okay.
Question: is it appropriate or possible for a changeling's icon to be considered a vestige in a crossover game? There are many kinds of items spontaneously imbued with some sort of magic significance throughout the different lines, such as tokens, charms, physical anchors, so on and so forth. Being able to tangle these incentives together seems like a handy source of conflict or drama.
I don't see why not. I think the fact that we've got a bit of a baseline now with Eternals. So Eternals are immortals that effectively have phylacteries. They are like Dorian Gray. They will have something that, as long as it's kept safe, they will never age. And so they're in Mummy the Curse. So by that rationale, if what they have is effectively a form of relic, there is absolutely no reason why magical tokens or tokens in Changeling, and I'm trying to think of some other, maybe even some weapons used by the Aegis Koru Dai in Hunt of the Vigil, they might be considered vestiges. I quite like the idea of a mummy cult hoarding a bunch of changeling tokens, and just the sheer shit that will befall them for robbing a group of changelings. I don't think that's going to go well for them. But it could lead to a fun crossover when the mummy wakes up and finds what's happened to their cult. Half of them have been dragged through the hedge into Arcadia, and the mummy's got to make a deal with some gentry to get his cultists back.
I think that'd be beautiful. That sounds like a great deal of fun. Okay, heading back over to the forums. From Florin at the forum, what reaction from fans has surprised you the most, and what reaction has encouraged you the most?
That's a nice broad question.
Yeah.
Surprised and encouraged. The reaction that surprised me the most is how eagerly everyone has adopted the timeless aspect. Because I understand it was hinted at in previous first edition books. I don't recall it being hinted at. I'm sure it was. But I initially proposed the timeless aspect to Rich. And the fact that this out of nowhere idea, this memento style time lapse thing going on, was appealing. Hell, I got inspiration from that from Lost, from Fringe, from anything that dealt with time travel in a rather disturbing and bleak way. And people just seem to love it. People just seem to love the idea of playing mummies across multiple eras, which of course they were always able to do, but now they can do it with an embedded reason. And the thing I'm most encouraged by, to go back to the critique of the utterances in the character creation chapter, because what we do at Onyx Path, for anyone who doesn't know, is during a Kickstarter, the Kickstarter for this game is of course ongoing, we release a chapter a week out to the backers. And what it does is it whets appetites, it builds enthusiasm, but it also allows fans to give us feedback. And we released chapter 1 and chapter 2. Everything was peachy. Everyone loved it. They loved everything from the guilds and decrees that we mentioned earlier, to the explanations of the Nameless Empire, to the cosmology written by people such as Leith Shields, Clara Herbal, and all that was lovely. And then we got on to the utterances and affinities. And while there were certainly people that enjoyed them, there were certainly people that didn't. And what I was encouraged by was the amount of heart that people were putting into their feedback. It wasn't scathing. It wasn't, fuck you. It was, this is what I would really like to see. And sometimes we can listen to that. Sometimes we can incorporate it, I should say. Sometimes we can't. But the sheer, I guess, courtesy people were giving us as creators was lovely to see. So it obviously makes you more encouraged to listen to the fans when the fans are being so nice about your work. So yeah, that was encouraging.
Cool. Heading back over to chat, we have a question, and I think we've gone into this a little bit, but so maybe just to add, if there's any we haven't covered, or if you could expand on them. What options do mummies have for bringing friends, lovers, and others with them through their timey-wimey adventures? Can a mummy get a rose?
Well, we touch upon it in this book, but I would like to explore it more. I very much like the imagery, the idea of entombing yourself with your followers, because as we know, mummies in real world history, or pharaohs in real world history, I should say, would occasionally have their favored servants entombed with them, those lucky people. And they were supposed to go to duet with them. They were their pallbearers, their entourage, as they went to greet Thoth and Anubis and Sobek. And so being able to do that with Mummy the Curse as well seems perfectly logical to me. That if you if you're willing to be entombed with the mummy, then you should be able to emerge with the mummy when they next awaken. I guess the loop that still needs to be threaded is how they would appear on the other end, because while the mummy is always going to have his sahu, his body, even if it's just an organ in a canopic jar, those cultists aren't. So how do they appear in this other era? So yeah, there's bits on it in Mummy Second Edition, but it's something I would really like to explore more in the Book of Lasting Death, which is the source book we are getting very close to funding the release of.
Excellent, yeah. So if you haven't, run over to the Kickstarter and toss your bits in. Make sure that we get to that so that we can.
Yeah, we're not that far off, and I think we may even have some of the high-end pledge levels still available. So do be generous, and if you want more than one copy, that's always good too. Bear in mind also, if you order a few copies, you can always sell them on later. Just saying.
That is true. That is
or option. Give them to your friends as presents.
Right,
give them out to your gaming group.
Holidays are right around the corner, and you're going to spend a bunch of money on those. And then you're going to not think about birthdays that are going to be in February, and then you're going to go, "Oh, I remember, I ordered extra copies of Mummy." But having said all that, our next question does come from Chad as well, which is going back to first edition. What did you guys think of the Cursed Necropolis Rio? And I am especially curious on your thoughts on the cover. Now, I will have to entirely let you feel this one, Matthew. I'm utterly unfamiliar with that book.
Yeah, I'm going to have to look up the cover for Cursed Necropolis Rio again. Let's see.
We can go on a Google adventure together.
Yeah, I just did. Oh, yeah, of course, I recognize that. So my main issue, this is starting off well. I remember I liked the geomancy in Cursed Necropolis Rio a lot. That's probably the thing that stood out to me the most. I think the main issue that I had with Cursed Necropolis Rio is I think it was the last source book for Mummy. It was a bit delayed. I know, shouldn't speak bad words like delay. And it had the issue for me that a lot of city source books do. So I'm commenting as a reader now, as a fan. And, there's grand coming from me as the developer of Chicago by Night, but I'm also aware of the flaws in doing city source books, namely that if your group doesn't have an interest in playing there, the city source book needs to be very general to appeal, or have so much in it that it doesn't matter where it's set, and essentially the title is just a placeholder. Now, for me, I was unlikely to set a game in Rio. I just wasn't comfortable with the setting, and so I never really gave it a huge amount of scrutiny. As for the cover of the book, I see we have Jesus on the mountaintop. And we have a mummy who I think I even know the model of that mummy, but I don't know. I suppose it does what it says on the tin.
Maybe we have two mummies on the cover. Was Jesus a mummy? Is there any discussion on Jesus' status as a mummy in second edition?
Well, if he was any supernatural creature, he was a Promethean created by God. There we go.
Hey.
I've answered the question. An aging Promethean, that didn't work.
Humanity, you can go home.
Yeah. I wish I had more to say about Cursed Necropolis Rio. It wasn't a book that has particularly informed this edition of the game.
That is a informative answer. So let's see here. What do we got here? Question. Do we have any more questions? I'll give you guys and gals and all parts adjacent and outside of that spectrum one last moment to type in some questions. And I will get to just a couple of quick ones that I had. So, nope, The one I had was covered, actually. The big one that I had when you were talking was covered. The big two I had were covered, actually.
Okay, so Jesus Christ, the supernatural figure.
Yeah,
No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't be a Promethean, would he? Changeling.
This gets way easier in the Scarred Lands cosmology because he'd just be a demigod.
Well, one could argue he's a mage. He awakened somewhere in his wandering years, right. And then could do all kinds of fancy little cantrips like turning water into wine, you know. But I see that more as a changeling thing. It would also explain that where those missing decades of his life were. He was, of course, a servant of the gentry. Makes sense. So he escaped just a few years prior to his ultimate crucifixion. But he had a power that allowed him to move a boulder with the strength of a man much mightier than he out of the way and revive. Or there you go.
Or he was a Geist that had been drowned by John the Baptist, and everything that came afterward was just part of his manifestations of his power.
Well, no, because Jesus was the Sin Eater, and the Geist was a John the Baptist reflection.
Right. Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
Anyway, this has no bearing on Mummy.
None whatsoever. But we did get another question.
Even Dixie thinks that Jesus would be a Sin Eater. No, he's a changeling. I have decreed.
We did get one more question out of that, though. So, and that question would be: besides immortals, cultists, sorcerers, and minor guilds, are you planning on making any other types of subsplats or other playable templates for Mummy in other books?
Do you need more? Christ. The changeling Christ. The no, the thing I always aim for when I'm developing books or coming up with new editions or whatever is trying to introduce as many playable options and antagonists as possible. I think it's the core of what a game needs. This is just my personal design philosophy, I guess, that a game benefits hugely by giving players agency from the very start with options, not too many to paralyze them, mind you, but options perhaps tiered in power like Mummy has, and antagonists to rail against, because if they don't have antagonists, what you have is a player's handbook. And if I was to start Dungeons and Dragons or introduce someone to the D&D for the first time and expect them to run it and not give them the monster manual or the dungeon master's guide, they may be a little confused with how to do it, because at least from memory, from the last time I read the player's handbook, it didn't even have sample goblins or wolves or dire rats in. So I think having options for the players, having options for the storyteller are very important. And to get to the point, I think we have provided a hell of a lot of them in Mummy the Cursed 2nd Edition. Now, if there was anything else I would like to be made playable in the Book of Lasting Death, maybe looking a little more into ghosts and how they can play a more active role in Mummy. That might be a good idea. But we do already have Geist the Sin Eaters. I know they're not strictly ghostly ghosts, but we could probably point people over there and say, hey, do this. And I certainly don't want to be rewriting material that has already been presented perfectly well in other games. So it's tricky. I think we have a lot to explore with the minor guilds, the immortals, the sorcerers, the mortal cultists, expanding those routes out, as well as the major guilds for that matter, and the different variations. So yeah, there's already a lot of options.
We have one more question about it's been mentioned that immortals are being made into a micro template or more fan-based merit template. I don't know what that means exactly. But what kind of things did you build the endless merits around?
Well, they're pretty few, the core endless merits, because you don't need many to make someone immortal. The trick is they have to have a curse associated with them, because no form of immortality should be perfect. And in fact, that is why the purified, as an example, aren't presented in Mummy the Curse Second Edition. Not because they aren't without flaws, but because of all the immortal types, the purified probably have the easiest run of it. That may be controversial. I don't know. So they have a few merits that are based around their supernatural resistance, so their resistance to other supernatural powers, their actual age, and how that merit translates into points you can spend on other things associated with your age, and basically elements like that. You will see more of them when Chapter 5 gets released to backers, because Chapter 5 contains Shuangsen, that's your lifeless cannibals, your immortals, your sorcerers, your judges. So the judges take an avatar form, because that's always nice. And yeah, a whole bunch more.
Awesome. Cool.
Oh, and Amkata, of course, the chimera-like creatures that are made up of the legs of one thing, the body of another, and the head of another. They are spirits of a kind. So yeah, they are there too.
Cool. Well, I think we got time for one last question, right? One last question from Big Damn Hero. I love your name, by the way. What sort of chronicles based in the future would you like to see for Mummy? Space opera, cyberpunk, post-apocalyptia, Return of the Nameless Empire?
Post-apocalyptic would work very well for Mummy. I think that's the natural progression for our world as it is
Right,
today.
yeah,
Look at the news.
20 minutes from now.
Yeah, 10 years ago I would have thought cyberpunk, that's our future. But
no, that's our
yeah,
now.
Yeah. But no, I think Mummy's work would work very well in post-apocalyptia, because again, it ties into that mystery, especially if you wake up in a bombed out city, or a city completely devoid of life, and you have to pick through the wreckage to find out what happened. I love a game like that, where you have to solve the clues and determine how did we get to where we are now. Even more mysterious would, of course, be if a mummy wakes up at that point and finds that their Sekhem stops reducing at a certain point. I mean, that is arguably the end of time if you do that, because your service has come to an end. But if you did that, if you finally found out your slavery, your chains had been broken, the judges, the Shanayatu, nothing cosmological cared about you anymore. But the world you are living in is barren or completely wasted. So you're free, but it's not a good kind of freedom.
Right.
So I.
You're Burgess Meredith in that Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah, that whining bitch, Burgess Meredith. What?
Changeling Christ.
Yeah, as if Burgess Meredith's character couldn't have stumbled his way to an optician's.
I know, right? Yeah, that's my argument.
I'm sure at least one pair of glasses survived the nuclear bombs. I know glass has an annoying habit of breaking or melting in a nuclear blast, but and anyway, let's be honest, he could have enjoyed sitting there with his book for a while.
He could have learned Braille.
Yeah, and he would. It's probably quite difficult to learn Braille if you've got no teacher and you start off blind. but I'll give you that one. But he would die of radiation poisoning before he gets to the end of any lengthy book.
That's probably true.
So I think he was really getting upset for no good reason. He was concentrating on the short term rather than thinking, long term, I'm going to die anyway.
Right.
Yeah.
Just enjoy the time you have, and that.
Yeah. As a big fan of the Twilight Zone, though, yeah, that's one of the best episodes.
It's a really good one. But well, on that note, I think we've hit our hour. Unless there's anything else that you wanted to share with the folks before we call it a day.
Yeah, anything I want to share. something a lot of people haven't been talking about, but I think they will when they see it, is going to be the duet section of the storytelling advice, storytelling chapter, where we explore what it is to roleplay a game in the land of the dead. Because this was another thing that in first edition, the point at which you entered the land of the dead was like a hazy dream. You never roleplayed it. And you might remember fragments, snatches of it, but you never remember the whole arc. Now, that may still be true. Your mummy may not remember their trials in Duat, but that doesn't mean you can't roleplay them. So now we have essentially a cross-planar experience for Mummy the Curse. And when people read that, I think they will be very happy. Famous last words, I know, but I think that's what happened.
Well, I certainly hope so. And there's one way that all of you who are in the chat, and again, thank you for coming by. Those of you in the chat or those of you watching this in the repeats, one way to find out is to head over to the Kickstarter and back it now, so that when that manuscript hits with the duet section, you'll be able to pick that up right away, dive right in, and let Matthew know constructively what you think. But yeah, no, it's been
let's make Changeling Christ a meme.
Changeling Christ.
Yes.
Yeah, that's just gonna be how I'm gonna curse now. Just with the little wings sticking out, and oh goodness. Anyway.
Yeah, Jesus was famous for his wings.
He was, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, he could have just flown straight off that cross. Yes, a Christling, as Dixie said. I think those were the disciples, the Christlings. That was their band's name.
It hurts.
They were an early form of dance troupe, the Christlings.
You ever laugh so much that like this part of your jaw hurts? That's where I'm at right now. All right. So yeah, please, if you're watching this, do support Mummy on Kickstarter. Matthew, what do you have going on next? When's the next time we're gonna see you? I know you're gonna at some point this week. We or you or both of us will be ambushing the channel with some news.
Oh yeah, we'll do another news dive bomb on the Twitch channel. Those always seem to go well. So here's something, and it may sound a bit strange, but I've been having a chat with Rich Thomas, our creative director, about where some of our content is going, and we are thinking of expanding our media operation even further. And this is fairly new info. I'm going to be, and I have in fact, starting to put videos on my YouTube channel again. Now, there's a few reasons for that. Speaking quite candidly to you, the audience, while we are very happy with the way the Twitch channel has been growing, the content we're putting out is, well, that we have a lot of volume, it's excellent quality, and there are people tuning in every single day, and that's wonderful. Likewise, our YouTube subscriber numbers have gone up by about 1,000 in the last year, so that's also good. But we don't want to get trapped in the trapped talking to the same bubble of people. We'll continue doing Twitch, we'll continue doing our YouTube channel, but given that I have a YouTube channel as well with over 20,000 subscribers, it makes some sense to start putting some content on there too. And it really doesn't matter to me to use it to tell people about upcoming Onyx Path games, maybe run some actual plays on there too, but also do little deep dives into games like Scion and They Came From Beneath the Sea, interspersed with content not just for Onyx Path but for other companies too, because ultimately the Gentleman Gamer channel is still independent, but I will often talk about my work on there, as I always have. So in short, just as we always tell you to follow and subscribe us on Twitch, just as we always tell you to subscribe to us on YouTube, please give my channel, The Gentleman Gamer, a look, because that is where the Scion videos are going to be premiering now. So we will be doing The Gentleman's Guide to Scion on the Gentleman Gamer channel. There you go, hot off the
Nice.
press.
Awesome. See, that's your reward for tuning in is not only timeless knowledge about Mummy Second Edition, but now this hot exclusive. I feel like TMZ or something. Well, and thank you so much for sharing that with us, and thank you so much, audience, for joining us. We will be back here tonight at 8 p.m. Eastern, I believe, is our first stream for the night. We have our big programming block tonight, so we got Pugmire, Paws, and Claws, going into Uncanny Valley with Hunter the Vigil. Ooh, I got really confused for a second there. I almost called it Hunter the Requiem. With Hunter the Vigil.
The Requiem. That Hunter game went wrong. Yeah. It may have started off as Hunter the Vigil, but then they were all embraced.
Right. They got about halfway through the first session. And then wrapping up with Aberrant Community Service. So lots of stuff to watch tonight. Lots of stuff to check out over at That Mummy Kickstarter. You're going to want to go over and back. I think it's $5 gets you in the door to take a look at the manuscript if you're on the fence. And you look it over, and I have no doubt you will be pleased with what you see. Matthew, thank you so much for taking the time. And audience, thank you so much for tuning in. And everyone that was present and witnessed it, thank you so much for Changeling Christ. We'll see you all again.
Thank you, Changeling Christ. With his Christling Peter, who had to one-up him by doing everything upside down.